Hey y'all, it's Heather. Happy Monday. Welcome. So, welcome to my live stream at 4 o'clock every day. Talk about all things feel good. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good weekend. We're like heading into holiday weekend, and with like COVID and all the things last summer, some of the things we didn't get to do. I hope you're going to be able to maximize that time with your family, with your loved ones, just enjoying. This past weekend we got to do a little bit of that, and that felt so nice to. It's a good thing, very, very good thing. So I have been doing a couple of more things on the live streaming. So you know me, I'm super techie, and I just love to like try new things. And so I'm doing this thing called Friday Feelings. So every Friday, I'm just going to kind of post, do a little live random time, not really sure when, but, just talk about feelings. I am an emotional and spiritual coach, and I have a pastoral background. So I was in ministry for a long time, and I have done chaplain work and a variety of other things working with people, and I've been an educator for years. So I'm passionate about educating people about emotional health, spiritual health, and learning how to do and live a life of recovery. I've been in recovery from codependency, and I will be for the rest of my life. So I'm happy to share my experiences, my therapy journey, my own therapeutic journey. So that's what I'm going to start doing. So Friday Feelings. So look for those. You'll see them. I've already posted a couple of them. You can look on my Instagram, Real Life by Heather, and then Writing Real Life on Facebook. So I have some content today. We're going to talk about conflict. And without further ado, let's jump right in. If you have any questions, or if you're looking for a coach, or if you're looking for some insight, reach out to me. You can message me on Instagram. You can email me at heather@letsfeelgoodnow.com, or just go to letsfeelgoodnow.com, and it's going to give you all the details how you can get a hold of me. All right, so let's jump into our content today. So today we're untangling conflict. Untangling conflict. There is one thing that seems to get us all wrapped up is conflict. We get tangled up. It's easy to get tangled up. And what can we do to get untangled? So let's talk about it today. So the thing with untangling conflict is understanding what's driving our conflict really helps untangle and demystify the fear around conflict. So just like anything else, let's say your car breaks down, right? And it's a hot mess. And you're not a mechanic, and maybe your spouse isn't a mechanic, or maybe you don't know a mechanic, but you're not sure what's going on, and you're just afraid it's going to cost a gazillion dollars, because that's how automotive things are, right? Like every time I've ever fixed an automobile, I always have this huge fear that it's going to be some expensive deal, right? And when I get it to the mechanic and he does his thing, it usually, I would say 80% of the time, ends up being a relatively small thing. But if I hadn't gotten it to him for him to fix the relatively small thing, it could have turned into a big thing, right? So conflict it is not, it just is. We all experience conflict in our lives, and we certainly know what it feels like to be in conflict. We know what it feels like to observe a conflict, and we know what it's like to be in the midst of one personally. But understanding what's driving the conflict, what's driving our behavior, really is going to help untangle kind of the chaotic mystery of why conflict is so painful at times and so difficult. So just like my car breaking down, it looked really scary until an expert was able to look at it and determine it was a relatively small thing and we can get it fixed. But you kind of want that subject matter expert, right? You want somebody to be able to walk you through, what are some ways that we can look at conflict and understand what conflict is in order to better understand how and why we respond and react the way we do when we experience ouchy, difficult, challenging situations, conflict being one of them. So let's do some untangling. So number one, what conflict is and what conflict isn't. Okay, so conflict is caused by somebody else. Conflict just is. It is just like rain is, sunlight is, winter is, spring, summertime is. There just are. They're states of being, and conflict is one of those things that, just like love, just like community, just like togetherness, those are states of being, right? They're like what we would call form, these things that we have attachment to and connection to, and we find great joy from or great pain. But conflict is just part of being a human, right? And it's not bad and it's not wrong. So many times we will define conflict as bad, and I certainly have been one of them. And what that does is just make me want to avoid it, right? Because if it's bad, I don't want to go near it. Well, that often plays out in coping mechanisms later on that we're going to talk about. But conflict is neither bad nor good. There's nothing wrong with conflict inherently. It's just part of being a human being that we will inevitably disagree with someone we love or someone we don't love, but we will experience conflict. What we forget is our earliest relationships, and I've referenced this before. Our earliest relationships, as when we were children, we were being raised by caretakers, parents, grandparents, foster home, foster parents, uncles, aunts. Those caretakers modeled for us what conflict looked like, acted like, sounded like, and how conflict was done. Okay? And so we learn that doing conflict a certain way is we either think it's appropriate or inappropriate, because it depends on how we experienced and learn that doing conflict really by osmosis. We just children are little sponges, and we just absorb that understanding, we absorb that environment, and we experience it fully. And so we take on that behavior. It's mirroring. That's how children develop. We mirror the behavior we see by our earliest caretakers, right? Okay, so that's important to understand, that conflict is not bad, but it just is. It's part of being a human. And the thing is that conflict is defined, really shaped by our earliest relationships with our caretakers. Okay? All right. So remember, I was referencing if it's bad, we avoid it. Okay, well, this is some of the conflict behaviors. Avoidance. Let's agree to disagree, which is avoiding entering into conflict, right? Just kind of making everything okay, smoothing things over. That is a classic sign of avoidance. Denial. What are you talking about? That didn't happen. I didn't say that, right? That's kind of denial. Certainly gaslighting can be in there if somebody's saying something didn't happen that we truly saw and experienced. But denial typically shows up as, I don't want to remember that. That's too painful. What are you talking about? We're fine. Everything's good. Okay. Hypervigilance. Okay, so that's me. I'm a hypervigilant person. So if I feel like there's conflict, I want to talk about it right now. And I want to resolve it right now because I want it to end quickly, I don't want the conflict to extend out over a long period of time. And then stonewalling, which is also like withdrawing. You know, some people in my life tend to need more time to process in order to be able to respond. But stonewalling is, I can't talk about this and I won't ever talk about it until you drop the subject, right? So that's some of the conflict behaviors. There's, I think there's like a template of like 5 to 6 different conflict behaviors, but these are the main ones that we'll all recognize. And the big one is let's agree to disagree. I'm sure y'all have heard that before, right? So Brene Brown, who we all know, if you don't know her, you need to know her, wrote a book called Braving the Wilderness. And this was 2017. So she did a lot of research and spent a lot of time talking with Dr. Michelle Buck, who is like a specialist in conflict. She calls it conflict transformation. Okay. And this is a quote from her. People often silence themselves. In other words, silence ourselves, or agree to disagree without fully exploring the actual nature of the disagreement for the sake of protecting a relationship and maintaining the connection. I'm going to break that down, but I'm going to finish reading the sentence. But when we avoid certain conversations and never fully learn how the other person feels about all of the issues, we sometimes end up making assumptions that not only perpetuate, but deepen the misunderstandings that can generate resentment. Because this is a lot of words, and I know that, and I really thought about it before I included it. So the first part of this sentence is we silence ourselves. How many times have you been in a conversation where you knew you were simply choosing to silence your voice in order to please the other person or just placate or to accommodate, right? So agreeing to disagree is doing that. It's placating. It's accommodating another person. I did it for a very, very long time in my previous marriage, okay? So, but what this does is when I accommodate or placate, agree just so that we don't have it, that there's no problems, there's no pain or discomfort, we're not really exploring the depth of the other person we're in relationship with. And the reason why we want to do this agree to disagree is because we love this person we're in relationship with, and we are afraid that we will lose connection. That us fully expressing our feelings or expressing our frustration or pain or anger or whatever the conflict situation is without truly carefully and respectfully expressing our opinions, if we feel like we can't express ourselves fully so that the other person really tells us how they fully feel and are experiencing the conflict, we think we're protecting the relationship by not going there. When actuality, we're doing the opposite. We're going in the opposite direction. We're wanting to maintain connection, but when we do this, when we agree to disagree, we're becoming two people standing side by side, and we're certainly not touching at all, right? So we think we're maintaining the connection by agreeing to disagree, but we're really not. And all it does is cause more pain and more disconnection when we don't fully experience one another, both in the good and in the bad. So by avoiding conversations, this is the second part of the sentence, we never really learn. We never really come to a deep understanding of the people we are in relationship with because we are afraid. But then what happens is we make up stories about what we think they are feeling, and those are assumptions. So we make up a story and we convince ourselves this is why they behave this way, And then we just continue to really, it's perpetual. And then we become more and more resentful, more and more disconnected, and the cycle continues until the relationship breaks. Because relationships are a two-way street. And I talked about that last week. That's why I want to talk about conflict, because I'm building onto this. But it's a two-way street. It's positive and negative. So we need to understand that agreeing to disagree is a big, big thing that we think we're doing to protect the relationship when actually we are harming it. Okay? All right. So number two, conflict happens because we care. I don't know how many times I have to tell my family members, different ones, at different times. And I have to tell myself this. If I go, oh, I don't care, I don't care. No. If I'm saying I don't care and I'm mad about it, I certainly care, right? Conflict happens because there's something that we really, really care about. And we feel like we're not being heard. We feel like we're not being seen. We feel like we're not being acknowledged. Also, conflict happens when we need or want connection, like we are afraid of losing connection. So we're constantly either overcompensating or placating or people pleasing, and then we get resentful, and then conflict happens because we're human and we run out of energy real quick. People pleasers, we have a finite amount of energy, and when that energy dissipates, it gets ugly, right? So conflict happens because of that. Also, when we love one another and we're in relationship, there's a reason why we are in relationship. So we want that connection. But because of the way we learned about connection and disconnection as a child, that impacts how we ask for what we need and ask for what we want. And sometimes we don't ask and we just assume that the other person should know, and then we don't get the connection we want. And so conflict happens. And we all have different versions of what connection looks like and acts like. Okay, so that's just across the board. Everybody experiences things differently. There's no carbon copy of connection. Everybody experiences connection differently and has a need for different things. Yes, certain things are hallmarks of connection: listening, active listening, asking questions, empathy, mirroring, asking questions and being present, eye contact. All those things are hallmarks of connection, but we all have varying degrees of what helps us feel connected to another person. Okay? All right. So this is a quote from James Baldwin, which I like. I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their pain. Very true. Very, very true. It's very easy to hate. It's very easy to stay angry and mad. But once that all dissipates, what's usually left is pain. And conflict is painful. And so if we avoid conflict, or a conflict happens and we don't want to deal with it, so we avoid it, the pain is still there. It's just repressed. It's just pushed down. It's just silenced. So it's going to come out one way or the other. It just usually comes out sideways. It comes out as maybe resentment, or fear, or anger, or passive aggressive. Just a few examples. But remember, we talked about owning our pain, and my quote is, if we don't own our pain, it will own us. That fits here very, very well. So what do? Well, we try to transform it. So if we can transform how we do conflict, we will start to become untangled. We won't feel as stuck, as tied up in understanding that conflict is not a bad thing. It is part of all relationships, but how we do conflict matters immensely. So when we are transforming our conflict, we can do this by recalling what shaped how we learned what conflict looks and acts like. In other words, you'll look back at your childhood, you reflect on it, you kind of think about some situations where conflict happened. How did your family deal with it? What was kind of the thing? For my family, it was complete avoidance. Until it blew up, right? Or it just got a big issue. Or if it was about somebody else. If it was about somebody else, we had no problem talking about it. But if it was about our stuff, which is very typical, it was not really spoken about. And so avoidance was a big part of it for me, which is, I actually overcompensate. So because I grew up with, avoiding conflict, and that's how we dealt with things, I responded opposite with being hypervigilant. So my fear is that if we don't deal with it now, it's going to be avoidant, and all those feelings of what that felt like when other people avoided the conflict and didn't just talk about it honestly happen in me. And I don't want to feel that, right? I don't want to feel that old pain. And so I want to fix it now, right? So that's hypervigilance. That's reflection, and that's years and years of therapy where I've learned that about myself. And you can too. There is ways you can really, truly reflect within yourself and remember situations that kind of remind you of your behavior or emotions that you feel today in certain situations, which is the writing prompts that we have. Also, transforming how we do conflict takes recognizing that it takes time to undo old patterns of behavior. It takes time. This is a patient process. There's no fix. There's no quick, easy button. This is hard work. It takes energy. So try to be patient. And we transform doing conflict by trying on new ways of being, new ways of engaging in conflict that may feel immensely uncomfortable at first, but with practice, you can learn. You can learn how to regulate what you're feeling when those high conflict situations rise up, and you can kind of be aware, very self-aware of your behaviors and what your old patterns were and what you are wanting to do. What you have decided is the new behavior you're looking toward to transform how you deal with conflict. Changing how we manage conflict in relationships is a delicate process. It's like trying to untangle generations of knots, one knot at a time. I'm going to have a drink of water here. So changing how we manage conflict in relationships, it's delicate. I don't know if you've ever had like a gold chain necklace where it's very thin and it gets knotted up, and the more you pull and yank on it, the tighter it gets. So one time my husband, my daughter had a necklace, and it was a delicate gold necklace, very, very thin, beautiful, and it got tangled up. And I kept pulling on it because, well, I'm hypervigilant, so I want to fix everything right away, and I tend to be that way. He says I'm a bull in a china shop, is what he says. It's very true. But he very patiently, put it down on a flat surface and used some tools like a small screwdriver to gently untangle the gold necklace. So that's conflict. Conflict is this beautiful gold necklace that has been tangled up and yanked on and really needs a delicate touch. So we are trying to untangle generations of behavior that have been passed down from one generation to another. That's how we develop, we evolve, we learn new ways of being. And that's why I'm here doing what I do, sharing this, and it's what I've done in my own life, because that's the best way to really feel good. is really recognizing that the pathway to feeling good is going through some discomfort and some self-awareness and some self-growth and learning how to be patient and learning how to untangle things one little knot at a time. So change takes time. Remember, it's a million little tiny tweaks to change our behavior. So when conflict hits, number 1, slow down. 3, deep breaths. In and out. When we do that, it changes me physiologically right now just by doing those 2 deep breaths. Also, when it hits, when conflict happens, trying to stay open. In other words, don't clench up physically, don't run, don't go hide in the corner. Just try to stay open. And what that does is it helps slow down the initial and normal kind of defensive response that we all have. We all get defensive. I don't care how evolved you are. We all have things that trigger that defensive response because we feel like we're under attack. So staying open, deep breaths help the body to stay calm as we help the mind to slow down enough to not be corrupted. Also, a big thing with conflict, especially if it's in a romantic relationship or kids, parent-child, is listening and mirroring. So it's active listening, but it's a step further. So in Imago training, mirroring is a big part of a dialogue between 2 people. So a person listens and then mirrors back what the person has been saying. What that does is, number 1, it helps the person know that you're actually listening, but it also allows them the opportunity to correct what you may have heard in your mind as you were mirroring that wasn't really what they were trying to say. So it allows that natural kind of connective force with dialogue to happen and presence with intentional active listening. Also, if there's a conflict going on and you're listening and you're mirroring and you feel like you're not getting very far, one of the things that I try to do, even in my own relationships, is just say, well, help me understand, walk me through where you're at, or tell me more. What that does is say, hey, I'm here with you. I'm trying to understand. It's empathy, but it's a verbal empathy. You're just kind of giving verbal cues. Hey, can you walk me through that? Or tell me more about that. Tell me more about what you're feeling. And yes, this is incredibly difficult work, especially if you're in conflict over a sensitive issue that's in your relationship. So this is a slow process. It takes time to learn how to do this. There's no expert because this is just all really, really kind of raw stuff. And conflict brings all that up. So that's why we do these 4 things, okay? Now, a big thing I want you to think of is after the conflict. So sometimes when conflict is over or you've walked through it and you've listened to one another and you still kind of disagree on a situation, what's really important is after the conflict for yourself to remember the roadmap. So the roadmap, remember, is knowing there's a triggering event that has caused this emotional response. So we need to slow down. We need to allow ourselves to kind of just be in our body, feel what we feel. But most of all, after conflict, try to become curious. Try to become curious with yourself over maybe why you reacted the way you did. What emotions were you feeling during the conflict? What was happening in your body? Write them down, and the writing prompts that we're going to do next really, really help with that because it helps you walk through your emotions from a more observational way. It doesn't feel as personal. There's something about writing on paper that it comes out much easier, okay? But really trying to reflect on what you're feeling by using the feeling wheel, okay? So the feeling wheel is a great, great tool. I've talked about it before. Use the feeling wheel to help name those feelings. And this isn't a pop quiz, so you don't have to get like 10. Like 3's good, okay? So, but the feeling wheel will help you kind of narrow down and prune away to really understand what it is you're feeling. When you name it, you become a master of understanding that your feelings don't own you. They're just giving you data, okay? But they're important, and they need to be seen, and they need to be acknowledged, but it's data. Doesn't mean it's true. It's just data. Okay. So here's some writing prompts, and then we'll wrap it up. So a recent conflict, and so just quickly about these writing prompts. So the writing prompts are intended to kind of allow you to walk through this on your own. I'm just going to go through them as an example and kind of give you a sense of how I use them. And sometimes I talk through them, sometimes I write through them, sometimes I do it on my phone. It just depends. But these writing prompts are definitely a wonderful avenue for you to begin to kind of doing that internal reflection for your own personal wellness, your own emotional health, above all. So here's the first writing prompt. A recent conflict that felt hard and challenging was my daughter. Me and my daughter had a conflict probably a couple of weeks ago. It was very intense. It always is. And we were arguing over a really personal issue that keeps coming up. And for some reason, we just can't get past this issue. The conflict felt overwhelming to me because it felt like we're never going to be able to fix this. And it just felt scary and overwhelming. That reminds me of a conflict I had with my parents, and it wasn't a conflict. It was a conflict without conflict. So I got caught doing something wrong, and my brother was involved, and he somehow got more in trouble than I did. They just didn't want to talk to me about it. It was never addressed. It was about a boy, I think, and I was never to see that boy again. And it was my brother's friend. And there was just this sense of foreboding, like I did not know what was going to happen. And so there was a long period of uncertainty until it just faded away. And that really reminded me of my hypervigilance to fix the problem with my daughter. The feeling of overwhelm and anxiety is because I don't want this conflict to keep happening. And I don't want to avoid it. I just want to fix it. I want to get it done. But it reminds me of like the opposite of when they avoided the conflict and didn't address it and just waited until it faded away. And I think I've done conflict both ways before, but this time it reminded me of my desire to really try to fix it, like this urgency to fix it. And I was scared that it would just always be this way. And it just reminded me of that memory when this really weird conflict happened that wasn't a conflict because no one talked about it until it just faded away. It's a classic situation in my family. All right. What I think I needed then was somebody to just tell me what happened. I needed someone to just, I know I needed my parents to just walk in the room and sit down and say, hey, Heather, okay, this happened. This is what we don't like. This is what we didn't like. This is what you did. Let's talk through why you did that. And then let's decide a way forward. Boy, even saying that like brings me like such validation that I was like, really just could have benefited from just somebody to talk me through what was going on, rather than the uncertainty and the ambiguity and the vagueness, right? But I didn't get that. So I became controlling and irresponsible. Irresponsible with my behavior at times. I acted out, but also mostly as an adult became much more controlling and fixing and resolving to avoid that uncertainty, planning, always having a plan, and planning ahead to avoid that potential danger of uncertainty or ambiguity. So that's where the conflict comes in of my daughter, the reoccurring conflict. It feels dangerous to me. It feels like, why does this keep happening? We resolved this. I became a hypervigilant person where I just want to resolve things right away and right now. And that doesn't allow some people the necessary space they need to process conflict because they process it differently. The story that I tell myself about that is the story that I tell myself about that is, if it's not resolved right now, the pain will last forever. Recalling this, my body feels a little vibrational, not nauseous, but that hit me, that the pain would last forever. The part of my body where I'm feeling this is my abdomen. So definitely nurturing. The abdomen is the place where nurturing occurs. The feelings coming up now are nostalgia and surprise. Surprise at how I'm still afraid of pain. I don't want to deal with emotional pain. That was the story I told myself, that with my daughter is, if we don't deal with this now, the pain will last forever. And then there will be disconnection. Taking a step back from that story, it makes sense. It makes sense that I felt that way, given, how I grew up and how I learned about conflict. It makes sense that I felt overwhelmed and that the pain would last forever, especially since the conflict keeps reoccurring, right? Feels uncertain, feels ambiguous, that there won't be a solution. That feels scary to me. One way I can show up for myself now is to acknowledge that that makes sense and that emotional pain is scary for me. It makes sense that I'm scared of emotional pain. Trying on new ways of being in conflict may benefit my relationships by allowing for more space and allowing for their ability to be able to process this, the conflict in their way and in their time, and then allows both of us to come together in a way that is much more present and grounded. It's a calmer, safer place to be when I'm not hypervigilant. And that's my experience, but I think it definitely benefits my relationships when I allow for space, and it helps me regain my sense of groundedness that this won't last forever, that it will resolve in due time in its own way. But me forcing it or pushing it to be resolved will definitely not help. Knowing this, I may be more able to be gentle with myself with regard to emotional pain still being very scary for me, and that I can do things to help support myself and my nervous system to to help myself feel good even when life doesn't. I stuck my motto in there. It's pretty much that's what I believe. All right, I think that wraps up the writing prompts. So this live video is going to be a podcast. It'll drop on Wednesday, so you can check that out there. Also, I always include the writing prompts in the show notes, so you can go straight to them, just kind of get a sample of what it sounds like. And then they're written down there, so you can just journal it right from the podcast notes while you're listening with me. So there's digital content to help you feel good. Check it out on letsfeelgoodnow.com. Navigating Hard Emotions. It's an audio series. It's an audio file along with the workbook to kind of walk you through it. Very helpful, very powerful tool. And so all the things. So I do coaching, both individual and group work. I'm also working on workshops to bring virtually in the fall. So that's exciting. Work along with possibly going into some partnerships and collaborations with other coaches and other people who help people like myself on bringing content to help you access your feel good. And then, as usual, my podcast and my podcast interviews. So working on the next one now. That will be next month. So these are all the places you can find me online. You can find me on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the places. And I think that is that's what I have today. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope that all of you feel, like this has been beneficial to helping you untangle yourself with conflict. That you don't have to have it all figured out, but that there are some really practical steps to help you walk through conflict for both people in the conflict. Allowing space for me is the biggest lesson of all. So work through the writing prompts. Really take time to reflect and remind yourself on what the emotions, when the emotions come up in conflict, what does it remind you of? That will take you down a wonderful and perhaps painful pathway to recall kind of what drives how you engage with conflict. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next Monday. Again, podcasts will drop on Wednesday, probably around 9:30 a.m. I hope you guys have a great week. Take care. Thanks. Have a good one.